everyone, my name is Katerina Cerna. I am going to be talking about our paper, Transformation of HCI Co-Research with Older Adults, researchers, where we're going to reflect about researchers' positionality in the COVID-19 pandemic. I am a senior lecturer at Gothenburg University at the Human-Computer Interaction department. However, this paper was written together with my colleagues when I was still working at the University of Siegen, where Richard Paluch, Fabian Bäumer, Tanja Ertl, and Claudia Muller are still working at the IT for the Aging Society. And in the presentation, I'm going to briefly go through the background, a little bit discuss kind of which part of literature we were trying to address. I'm going to say a little bit about the empirical cases that we are drawing from, what kind of important findings we're trying to discuss, and then conclude. So this paper emerged as some sort of like a reaction on the situation that was taking place. So as I said, at the IT for the Aging Society, that's a group that is interested in in older adults and people who have maybe struggled with or not so digitally refined, and try to understand how can we include these people in the design of digital tools, but also how to make these tools more fitting to their actual needs. And as you can imagine, when the pandemic started happening in Germany and Switzerland, where the empirical cases are coming from, this was really heavily impacted our work because the imposed restrictions were extremely strict. We couldn't go to the university. We were not allowed to meet anyone, even outside. So this was really heavily impacted this group. And this paper was some sort of effort of our group to kind of reflect over, okay, what is it that we have done, and what did we kind of learn from this situation? The kind of body of literature that we are aligning ourselves with was aging and participatory design. We know that in participatory design with and for older adults, certain forms of participation can be configured and applied in a design project to kind of transfer the user-designer relationship, especially if this is aligned with the joint cooperative design, and the effort is kind of emphasize fostering of shared processes and aligning mutual goals, but also conceptualizing practices of participatory design with older and less technology savvy individuals. When it comes to positionality, we understand it as the researcher's beliefs, opinions, values, norms, and social background, and how this shape the research and how it's conducted. And this is not only about how the data is interpreted, but this is all about which kind of questions do we pose, what kind of data we collect, how we collect it, how we analyze them and present them. Importantly, positionality is not an individual attribute. It's not something that only exists at one point in time, but rather it's a collaborative process in which participants in the design process, as well as the researchers, collectively determine the direction of the position. So it's a dynamic process that's changing depending on who we meet and how we interact with them and what we create with them. In our empirical examples, the positionality was often connected to different ages. However, not because of the number per se, but rather that people with different ages often have different personal histories and have different approaches to learning, as well as can kind of navigate in the digital space in different ways. And the current gap in this regard was then that these topics has been explored to some extent. However, none of them has been explored together, especially in the context of the physical distancing consequences and how this kind of influenced the core research, especially as the need to especially as the need to use the digital tools arises like it did during the lockdowns. And we try to approach this through the lens of the collaborative approaches such as co-design and participatory design. We try to, even though our group had a couple of projects, we at the end kind of focus only on 2 empirical cases, which both of them engage with older adults and some sort of form of participatory co-design, but in a little bit different aspects. So project A, which was taking place in Germany, there was a project I was actually coordinating at the time. That one focused on fostering of autonomy of older adults by including them in participatory design and trying to enable their participation by teaching them how to use digital tools. In this setup, researchers work with individual seniors, volunteers in a city, and with one concrete association. Project B, which my colleagues were more coordinating, took place in Switzerland, and the basis was combining of caring communities and living labs. And the kind of grounding assumption project assumptions for the project were then community-based from the very start of the project and very much aligned with the community-based participatory research. Now, what was common for both of the projects was that they both heavily relied on a meeting, doing fieldwork in person. We had plans to go do observations in the local associations where older adults were learning how to use computers, as well as to kind of actually do co-design, participatory design on place, as well as the same was in Switzerland. There a lot of meetings and public events were taking place in person, and several of these activities we managed to do actually before the pandemic hit. But then at one point we actually had to stop because it was not possible to do them in person anymore, and we had to consider: do we actually continue, or do we just do nothing? And because in our group we are very much aligned with kind of action research, and we believe that it is ethical to do something when a problem emerges, we decided often together with the participants to actually continue, but in this online mode, which again created an opportunity, but also many challenges. And one of these challenges could be, for example, formulated as the changes and the transformation of the researcher's positionality as we experienced it when we started going online with the older adults and with the other participants. Again, the differences in the positionalities varied between the different cases. In the German case, our effort to help to the participants by us as researchers created some sort of new forms of vulnerabilities, both on the sides of the researchers who were trying to do something nice, but at the same time, for example, to teach older adults how to use Zoom, but at the same time, it was just a difficult thing to do. Meanwhile, the older adults were suddenly forced to, or kind of prompted to engage with this Zoom space, which they have never experienced before, and which was even stressful at the beginning for them. In the Swiss case, then, the effort also developed by the researchers, again, in kind of providing these digital tools that maybe older adults are not used to, prompted to emerge like new types of responsibilities, and different people started taking care of different aspects of the research process. So in the paper, then, we try to discuss following themes. As I said, there are these different, the positionality kind of evolves in a different way in the different cases, which, as we reflected over, it stemmed from the different underlying assumptions, because each of the projects had a different starting points, and then they led to different constellations. We could also really observe the kind of aging discourse where the society really wanted to preserve and conserve the older adults and try to kind of make them healthy, but keep them healthy, but at the same time ignoring resilience that they have been manifesting quite a bit. And I think the positionality reflection has also really made us aware of the vast resilient resources a lot of the older adults we have been working with that they possess. And finally, the positionality, or reflecting over positionality, also made us reconsider the user and designer relationship. As we have seen in both of the cases, participation was something that was constantly being negotiated and dynamically changing, pretty much depending on the context, but often in the kind of impacted by this aging discourse. So to conclude, in contrast to maybe kind of traditional participatory design, but also gerontology research, where older adults are often work with older adults is often only done in on-site, we could see that it's actually possible to do an online research with them as well, and online activities. We could also see that participation was a joint achievement between all the actors, and where these different roles of being a professional researcher, but maybe also community co-researchers, are mutually built through the interaction. And we also try to kind of question the current social models in which older adults kind of are urged that they should behave in a certain way, instead of kind of considering what actual resources the people have and that they can use. And that was it for me. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Katerina. And just one quick question as we are running out of the time. You mentioned the new novel practices. Whether do we need these new novel practices when pandemic will be over one day? Or should we go back?
So I think with all these types of kind of remote engagement with users, just because we can meet in person doesn't mean it's always possible to meet with them in person. I was also thinking about it with the kids. I mean, kids can also get sick, and then maybe you don't want to travel all the way to some meeting point. With the older adults, mobility is a big issue for them. On one hand, maybe it's difficult to go all the way to the university, and then they would miss the session if it was only in person. At the same time, they are also busy people, so maybe they would have to skip completely the in-person session, but they were able to join just for an hour. So I think it opened like a new forms of participation that we didn't anticipate. And even though we kept on meeting with the older adults for 2 years, at least in my project, and they were almost 10 people coming to almost every session, which is a huge number in contrast to other papers that I've seen. And I think this kind of ease that it became eventually, it was part of it, that it was easy to kind of just sit at home and do this. So I think this is why it's necessary, like it's useful to have these different modes that you can combine and that you can rely on. And I would recommend to anyone who starts to participatory design with older adults to teach them at the beginning, this is Zoom, this is how you can use it. And in case you cannot meet in person because of whichever reasons, being pandemic or mental well-being or physical well-being, you can then always kind of go back to them and use them. Plus, the older adults appreciated a skill that they could use in other contexts as well. So this was again another reason.